Pretty much every article, TV show and video, it says that Hadrian's Wall was built to keep out the Scots, but this isn't necessarily the case, and it seems that most historians don't really know exactly what was going on in Britain at that time. To give you an example of how little we do know about this period, there's the Spanish 9th Legion, which famously disappeared somewhere in northern Britain in around 120. But some historians say that they were out fighting in Armenia decades later. But here's what we do know. In 43 AD, the Romans invaded and led a series of campaigns further and further north until around 84 AD. And they did defeat the Caledonian Confederacy at the Battle of Montegraupius, but they didn't stay around for very long, and Hadrian's Wall was built in 122 AD. This is where it gets a little bit more confusing, because the wall didn't necessarily divide two clear sets of people. Well, just south of the wall there were the Brigands, and they continued rebelling against the Romans for decades, and some sources say that the Romans in fact had to retake the north of England, and further south of them there were a collection of different tribes and coalitions. Just north of the wall you had the Votadini, the Selgovae and the Novantae, and you'd have to go a lot further north before you ran into the Picts. And these tribes just north of the wall were more closely connected to the Brigands in the south, and they had been defeated by the Romans previously, so it wasn't as if they were any more fierce. This is apparent because the Romans built the Antonine Wall further north decades later. However, this wall was quickly abandoned, but it doesn't seem like the Romans suffered any catastrophic defeats up there. Instead, a lot of historians have suggested that the Romans came to some sort of agreement with the tribes in between the two walls. It seems that the location of the wall was merely decided just because it was the narrowest point in Britain. And you could also argue it wasn't a defensive wall at all. After all, the Romans they preferred fighting in open fields, and the wall's far too narrow to really allow troop movement. The Romans built a hell of a lot of gates in the wall, in fact one every mile, and if you compare this to say the Great Wall of China, which has very few gates, you can see this isn't the best defensive tactic. So the Romans probably wanted people to go through the wall, but just wanted to monitor immigration and get customs. You should also know that the Romans built all sorts of defences around their empire known as lines. Well, some were just geographic features, but in Germany there was a series of palisade ditches and watchtowers that stretched for hundreds of miles. These palisades and ditches in Germany didn't stop a full-scale invasion, but they did stop the odd sporadic raid and did allow the Romans to tax people coming into their empire and monitor immigration. So why didn't they do the same thing in Britain? There's a few theories behind this, but first of all, it could have been a hell of a lot cheaper in the long run, had the Roman Empire lasted centuries longer, I mean. Now, this is because the watchtowers and palisades in Germany required far more men, whereas Hadrian's Wall required far fewer, so therefore it's cheaper. It could have just been a show of strength, not necessarily to the people just north of the wall, but also to those rebelling in the south. And it would have made it slightly harder for the groups north and south of the wall to form an alliance against the Romans. It should also be said that Emperor Hadrian was looking to contain the empire. At the same time the wall was being built, he withdrew from Mesopotamia. So this wall could have just been an exaggerated way to define the boundaries of the empire and nothing more.